Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
Hi, today we're discussing chromium. It's a mineral, and you need it for the proper utilization of calories. You need it to properly store fats and carbohydrates and protein, and to metabolize them and change them into energy. So it's a very important mineral, but it's a trace element, meaning you only need a small amount. Now, you can get it in food. It's found in whole grains like whole wheat. It's found in seafood. It's found in meat. It's found in vegetables like broccoli. It's found in potatoes. And you do get some in your diet, but if you lack it, you have a higher risk of developing diabetes. Now, in human studies, chromium, along with biotin, improves blood sugar control in people with type 2 diabetes. And a very large population study indicated that those who consumed not enough chromium had a higher risk of diabetes, and those who consumed chromium supplements had a reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which is a current plague on humanity. There's so many people with type 2 diabetes. So welcome to our episode, Chromium picolinate, for the maintenance of healthy weight and controlling your blood sugar. Hi, this is nutritional pharmacist Jerry Hickey. Now, the research in humans shows that when you have sufficient chromium, it's easier to keep fat off, and it's easier to get rid of fat, and it's easier to maintain muscle. That's an important point. And these studies started in the 1990s. So I went over several decades of studies. We'll do it quickly. If you have enough chromium and you're dieting, you lose fat, but you maintain your muscle mass. In fact, you can gain additional muscle. That's an important point. A lot of people who diet, they actually lose muscle as well as fat. And if you lose muscle, well, you're more likely to fall and hurt yourself. You're more likely to become frail. Muscle's needed for good health. So here's current therapeutic research, but it's not a very current study. It's from 1996. This journal's been around for a long time. And it's a state-of-the-art trial. It's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled human clinical trial. That's a gold standard trial. It's 154 people who are trying to lose fat. And they gave them a nutritional drink with protein and carbohydrate, and it had either a placebo added to it or it had various strengths of chromium added to it, 200 micrograms or 400 micrograms. And they gave this to people over a 72-day period, and they found that over the 72-day period, either strength of chromium, either 200 microgram or 400 microgram, in conjunction with a protein drink, improved muscle and cut fat. Now, that's a very early study. So here's something a bit later, and this is in diabetics. This is from the year 2008. It's from the University of Vermont, which is a very high-quality academic research institution. A daily supplement of chromium picolinate in combination with a common anti-diabetic medication improved blood sugar control and also cut weight gain in people with diabetes. Now, once again, it's a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled human clinical trial. That's a state-of-the-art study. It's University of Vermont, which is probably the most expensive university in the country if you're out of state. Now, according to the researchers, 2/3 of people with type 2 diabetes, they don't reach their goals for controlling their blood sugar. So about 67% of people with type 2 diabetes, their sugar is too high. And over 80% of people with type 2 diabetes are overweight. In fact, some of them are very overweight. So this is published in the journal Diabetes Care. They recruited a group of people with type 2 diabetes, and they were on a very commonly prescribed diabetes drug. It's a sulfonylurea called glipizide. They gave them 5 milligrams a day. Half of them were put on placebo, and the other half were put on 1,000 micrograms of chromium picolinate for 6 months. At the end of the study, the researchers found that the people who had the drug plus the chromium supplement lost weight. In fact, they didn't gain weight. The other group was actually gaining weight. They actually lost weight, and it improved their muscle mass. So there really is something to this, because muscle is one of the ways that you can control your blood sugar. Your blood sugar is controlled through an organ called your pancreas, mostly. It releases insulin and glucagon. Insulin to lower the amount of sugar in the blood, glucagon to raise it back up again in between meals so you have enough sugar for energy. And it's also stored in the liver, but it's also stored in muscle. And once sugar gets into muscle, it can't escape. It's stored in the muscle as glycogen and used later on when you do something physical. So having more muscle mass when you're diabetic is a very good thing. So when they gave the diabetics, all of them got the same drug, glipizide. Half of them got 1,000 micrograms of chromium picolinate for half a year. The other half got placebo. And not only did they not gain weight, they actually lost fat and gained muscle. So it was increasing their lean body mass. Now, this is a very recent study. It's actually a review of human clinical trials, and it's from January 2019. So I went over 3 decades here. It's in the journal Nutrients, which is a very good journal, and listen to the research institutions involved. Baylor University in Texas, Central Michigan University, and Nova Southeastern University. So it's a review of the trace mineral chromium picolinate, and they found out that if you're dieting and exercising, you lose not just fat, but muscle. But if they gave you chromium, it preserved your muscle. In fact, a number of these people were actually adding muscle. So that's a very important point. Once again, many people who diet, not only are they losing fat, they're losing muscle. And as you know, it takes a lot of effort to regain muscle. Chromium is very well known for its effects on blood sugar in diabetics. Now, if you lack chromium, you're more likely to develop diabetes. So when you get your multivitamin, make sure it has some chromium in it. And the form of chromium to use is chromium picolinate. There is a form from brewer's yeast. It's called GTF chromium. That's good also. But here's a study from Ohio State University Department of Nutrition. They're looking at the pharmacokinetics of chromium. Pharmacokinetics is something you learn in pharmacy school. It's how something is absorbed, like a drug or a supplement, how it's absorbed, where it's deposited in the body, how it's excreted, when do you get the highest blood level, how long does it last in the body. That's called a half-life. So they were looking at the pharmacokinetics of chromium, especially the absorption of it. And they found that chromium chloride was absorbed the least efficiently. Chromium polynicotinate was right after it. That's chromium attached to niacin. Way ahead, absorbed 3 times better, was chromium picolinate. So they found that chromium picolinate was absorbed magnitudes better than chromium chloride, and also amino acid chelated chromium and chromium nicotinate. So if you're getting a multivitamin, make sure it has some chromium, and make sure it's chromium picolinate. That's the one you absorb the best, because chromium is very poorly absorbed. When you take chromium chloride, it's like swallowing a rock. You don't absorb very much of it at all. It doesn't mean anything. And most of those one-a-day type of vitamins use chromium chloride because it's cheaper. They make more money on it. They get a bigger profit, but it's not the type to use. You want chromium picolinate. So chromium is a trace element. It helps you control calories. You store them better from fat, protein, and carbohydrate. You also utilize them better for rebuilding the body, getting rid of fat, building muscle, but it also helps you control your blood sugar. Now, how does it control your blood sugar? Chromium, when you absorb it, so that's why we use the picolinate, binds to a small protein, we would call that an oligopeptide, and it forms chromodulin. Now, chromodulin allows insulin to bind to its receptor site. And then insulin, so it preps the receptor site for insulin. That's what insulin docks onto. And then insulin can take the excess sugar out of your bloodstream and pack it away for later use when you need some energy in between meals. So that's how chromium seems to work. So now let's look at some of the studies on diabetes, because that's what chromium is best known for. Although chromium is good for if you're dieting, so you lose the fat and not muscle, and if you're exercising, you gain more muscle. And let's just go over the dosages. A regular person doing a regular amount of exercise, 200 micrograms of chromium as the picolinate a day is plenty. If you're dieting, or you're doing a lot of intense exercise like lifting weights or running, you want 400 micrograms a day, because people who do intense exercise, they lose chromium in their urine because they're using it up very quickly and the body's shedding it. For diabetics, the studies really indicate that 1,000 microgram is the preferred potency. If you give 200 microgram to 400 microgram, it generally doesn't mean anything for a diabetic. So let's just explain how you pack away sugar. And chromium is not the only mineral that's utilized by the pancreas to control your sugar. You also need a tiny amount of vanadium, and that should be as vanadyl sulfate, but you only need a tiny amount. Most of the supplement companies that make nutritional products use way too much vanadyl sulfate, way too high a potency in their blood sugar products, in the products to help diabetics control their blood sugar. The vanadyl sulfate, if it's too high a potency, becomes a free radical, and it's inflammatory to the human body. You just want a tiny amount, like 10 micrograms. That's plenty. Magnesium is utilized. Magnesium is needed to activate vitamin D in the kidneys, and then vitamin D helps control your blood sugar. So diabetics need both magnesium and vitamin D, and the problem is diabetics lose magnesium in their urine. And then the third mineral, and these are besides chromium, so it's vanadyl sulfate, magnesium, and you also need zinc. The pancreas utilizes zinc to release insulin and glucagon, so let's talk about that. In between meals, the pancreas releases glucagon from the alpha cells, and that takes some of the stored sugar and releases it into the bloodstream, so you have a steady source of energy. Otherwise, you'd get really fatigued in between meals. But during a meal and after a meal, when sugar's going high because it's getting absorbed from the food, the pancreas releases insulin from the beta cells, and this stores away the excess sugar. So there's always a balance of insulin and glucagon going on, and the pancreas requires zinc to release these at the proper ratio. So zinc, magnesium, a tiny bit of vanadyl sulfate. If you're diabetic, 1,000 micrograms of chromium, and in addition to that, you absolutely need vitamin D and B1. B1 is very important for diabetes also. You have to have B1 to control an enzyme called transketolase that allows the body to use sugar for energy. So all of nutrition is very important for diabetics. We've done a bunch of podcasts on it. Dr. Amanda Williams and myself, I'm nutritional pharmacist Jerry Hickey. We've done a number of podcasts on diabetes. Diabetics also need vitamin C because they don't utilize that properly. And if you really want to soak a person with diabetes with vitamin C and really enrich their body with it, give them 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day with meals. That's how you get the highest level of vitamin C orally in a diabetic. So let's look at the studies on chromium and diabetes. This is in the journal Nutrition in the Hospital, which is a great journal. It's been around for a long time. I read it frequently. They're looking at 13 human clinical trials and a systematic review and meta-analysis. A systematic review means you go through all these electronic websites. It wasn't possible before the internet. You couldn't do it back in the 1970s. And you go through all these electronic websites like PubMed and Scopus and Web of Science, etc., and Cochrane Review. And you look for the studies, in this case, that have to do with chromium and diabetes. And then that's called a systematic review. Then you perform a meta-analysis. You pick out the studies that you think are really high quality, lacking bias, and they're all looking at the same outcome. So in this case, they have 13 human clinical trials, a significant effect on chromium in diabetics on their fasting blood sugar. In other words, when a diabetic doesn't eat for 12 hours, their blood sugar is supposed to be below a certain level, supposed to be below 100. And they found out that it was lowering their blood sugar by about 30 points, 30 milligrams per deciliter. But it also improved their total cholesterol somewhat. It's a good thing. I mean, there's a number of studies showing that chromium is important for the heart by lowering triglycerides, by lowering bad cholesterol, by raising the good cholesterol called HDL, and by controlling blood sugar. So chromium is a very important supplement. So here's the Journal of Clinical Pharmacy and Therapeutics. And once again, a systematic review and meta-analysis. They're looking at 25 randomized placebo-controlled human clinical trials. These are state-of-the-art studies. 22 of the studies looked at chromium by itself. 2 of the studies looked at chromium with biotin. It was chromium picolinate. And they found that chromium by itself or chromium in conjunction with biotin significantly improved blood sugar control in diabetics. Also, chromium by itself reduced triglycerides and improved HDL good cholesterol. That's really important. When you look at total cholesterol, there's 3 factors. LDL, which is always considered a bad one if it's too high because it goes rancid easily and inflames and damages your blood vessel walls and leads to hardening of the arteries. Then there's one called VLDL that's pretty nasty also, and that eventually becomes LDL. And the third one is the good one, HDL. And HDL has 2 jobs. One of the jobs of HDL good cholesterol is reverse cholesterol transport. There's a factor in HDL cholesterol called phosphatidylserine that attaches to bad cholesterol inside the arteries of the heart and whisks it away and brings it to the liver, and the liver knows what to do with the cholesterol. And the second job of HDL is to reduce inflammation in blood vessel walls. So they found that chromium improves the level of good HDL cholesterol, lowers total cholesterol, and also helps improve your control of blood sugar if you're diabetic. So here's those studies where they mix chromium picolinate with biotin. And by the way, all of these studies are indicating that chromium as picolinate is the one to go to. That's the one that works. And typically in diabetics, you need at least 600 micrograms of chromium a day to make a difference. It really should be 1,000 micrograms a day. So here's a study, and it's from Yale University. I mean, my stepson went to Yale. I have to tell you, it's one of the most beautiful college campuses on the planet. A daily supplement of chromium picolinate and biotin improved blood sugar control by 15%. Yale University. These are people who are overweight or obese with type 2 diabetes. It's always hard for them to control their blood sugar. It's in the journal Diabetes Technology and Therapeutics. It's a pilot study. That means they're doing other studies. And these are people who could not control their blood sugar. The heavier you are with fat, the harder it is to control your blood sugar. And if you don't control your blood sugar, it can ruin you, because the elevated blood sugar inflames your organs, and it leads to damage to your blood vessel walls and heart disease and strokes and heart attacks, Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, Parkinson's disease, damage to your vision, damage to your eyes, even blindness, damage to your kidneys, even kidney failure, damage to your nerves without feeling, without sensation, but even nerve pain. So it's not good. You really want your sugar under control. So according to them, they gave 600 micrograms of chromium picolinate a day and 2 milligrams of biotin, or a placebo for 1 month. No 2 ways about it. Absolutely improved their blood sugar control. And they found out over time in other studies that it improves the HbA1c, so we'll go into that. HbA1c is like a panoramic view of your blood sugar control. So in the Yale study, they used a level in the blood called fructosamine that tells how well your blood sugar was controlled for 1 month. And they found that not only did the combination of biotin, which is a B vitamin, it's also called vitamin H, not only did the biotin with the chromium picolinate improve blood sugar, but it also reduced their cholesterol. And it also reduced another kind of greasy fat that clogs your arteries and leads to fatty liver and leads to strokes called triglycerides. So it really does mean something. It's in the Journal of Nutrition. So here's a second study looking at chromium picolinate and biotin, and it significantly reduced elevated blood sugar in people with type 2 diabetes over a 3-month period. Now here's the other thing. After 12 weeks, it also improved the HbA1c. So let's talk about that. That's a really important figure. Every diabetic should know their HbA1c. A normal blood sugar HbA1c is 5.7 is under 5.7. A normal HbA1c is under 5.7. Pre-diabetics, it's typically 5.7 to 6, and people with full-blown diabetes, it's over 6. The higher the level of HbA1c, the higher your blood sugar has been for the past 3 months. I'll explain that to you very quickly. The actual name of it, HbA1c, is glycosylated hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the oxygen-carrying component of your red blood cell. Hemoglobin is red. And sugar attaches to hemoglobin at a very slow rate. It takes 3 months for sugar to build up on hemoglobin. So they can only check this figure every 3 months. Otherwise, you won't see enough of a change one way or the other. So, if the glycosylated hemoglobin is above 6, you're diabetic. So it's not unusual for a diabetic to have an HbA1c, that's the abbreviation, of 7, 8, 9. And the higher it is, the worse your blood sugar. It's just out of control. So they found that when they gave the combination of biotin and the chromium picolinate, that the HbA1c improved by almost 2 points. That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Just putting them up. Now, all these people, by the way, were counseled on eating better. So they're on their medication. They're given counseling on how to eat. Half of them are given, in addition to their medication, they're giving the chromium plus the biotin. The other half, they're just given placebo. And they found just with counseling, the HbA1c improved by 1 point, which is amazing because sometimes when they give you a drug, it takes a whole year to improve by 1 point. But if they gave them the counseling and the chromium and the biotin, their HbA1c improved by almost 2 points. I mean, that's unbelievable. Now, in around 2005, the FDA allowed us to put a health claim for chromium on our labels. It's a qualified health claim. Chromium may reduce the risk of insulin resistance and possibly type 2 diabetes. So there is some real impact to chromium. Everybody recognizes this. A recent review of human clinical trials found that chromium is helpful for people with metabolic syndrome, which you would guess that. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of conditions that increase your risk of stroke and heart attack and diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease. So cholesterol is going up, blood sugar is going up, blood pressure is going up. Usually triglycerides are going up. They don't look at it often, but usually uric acid is going up, and these people are developing fatty liver. And you'll usually see a big component of belly fat in these people. So there was a study performed based on these reviews that chromium helps people with metabolic syndrome because it helps you lose fat, it helps you gain muscle, it helps you control your cholesterol, it helps you raise your good cholesterol, and it helps you lower your triglycerides, and it helps you normalize your blood sugar. So obviously that's going to help people with metabolic syndrome. So they actually performed a study that was just published several weeks ago in Nutrition Journal. It's a case-control study of 4,300 people. Half of them had metabolic syndrome, where their sugar was up and their blood fats were up and they had a big belly, and the other half were healthy. And they were matched by age and sex. And they found that the amount of chromium in the healthy people was much more normal, much higher than the people with metabolic syndrome. And they found that in healthy people, chromium reduced the risk of developing diabetes by almost 50%. Normally, you'll get enough to match the amount in these healthy people in a good multivitamin, and once again, look for chromium picolinate. Here's the last one I'm going to read you. It's from Johns Hopkins University. Low levels of the mineral chromium are linked to an increased risk of heart attack in men. The study was just done in men, but it probably applies to women also. So the researchers from Johns Hopkins University, they said chromium intake has been shown to increase insulin sensitivity, glucose tolerance, and the ratio of HDL good cholesterol to LDL bad cholesterol, all factors that benefit the health of the heart. So they measured the chromium level in toenail samples from 690 men who had a heart attack. And this is in 8 different European countries and also Israel. Now, they took toenail clippings because that gives you a long-term view of how much chromium they had in their body. You can't fake a toenail clipping. And they found that toenail chromium was inversely connected with the risk of having a heart attack. It's in the American Journal of Epidemiology. Men with the highest normal levels of chromium, 35% less likely to suffer with a heart attack. So chromium, very important supplement. Now, people who eat a lot of sugary foods, we're talking simple sugars, like donuts and waffles. We're not talking about whole grains. They lose chromium in their urine, just like people who do a lot of exercise, so they generally need additional chromium. The other thing is vitamin C might enhance the absorption of chromium. There's some evidence. They did a small study in women. When they gave a small amount of vitamin C with a chromium supplement, the women absorbed a lot more chromium into their blood. Quick review. Chromium should be taken in the picolinate form. Most of us just need 200 micrograms a day. If you do a lot of exercise or you're dieting, you want about 400 micrograms a day. If you're diabetic, you want about 1,000 micrograms a day. Add some biotin, vitamin H to that. It's a B vitamin. It's very safe. It's water soluble. You have to get it daily, and that'll help you control your diabetes better. It does help you lose fat and gain muscle. That's always a good thing when you're exercising or dieting. And it is good for your heart. So thank you for tuning in to the Invite Health Podcast. You can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Please subscribe. Please leave us a review. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And I hope to see you another time on another episode of the Invite Health Podcast. And thank you so much for listening.